One really exciting and effective way to select elements is using the CSS attribute selectors. These allow you to target elements based on the element's attributes and the values of those particular attributes. You're already familiar with using classes and ID selectors to allow you to style things based on a single attribute type, but attribute selectors allow you to use any attribute you wish, and the syntax is a little bit more flexible, which allows you to target styling based on a number of different factors. So let's go ahead and take a look at this extremely powerful capability that CSS gives you. This is the page that we're going to be working on, and the part that we're going to be concentrating on is this part down here. I have a bunch of different links, and I'll show you the HTML in just a second. These links are contained within an unordered list, and these are just simply a markup of simple links. Here's the starting HTML, and I already have some CSS that I've applied to the page that gives it the structure that it currently has. If we come down here to the HTML, here's an unordered list right here. It contains a series of list items, and each of the list items contains a link. And in this unordered list, the links go to different file types. So for instance, this link is linking to a GIF file. So is this one. This one actually goes to a PDF file. This one goes to a Word doc type. This one goes to a MP4. This one links out to an externally hosted web page, as does this one right here. And this one links to an external web page as well. And then down here, I just have a paragraph that wraps around a series of links that are being separated via break tags, and the links are simply linking to specific GIF images, except for the last one is just a null link, and I put a rel attribute on this one so we could do some different things. So this is the HTML markup that we're going to be using, and I'll come back and reference this once we start creating our CSS. So I'm going to start off by creating a CSS comment, and I'm just going to make a note to myself that I'm using my attribute selectors here. Obviously this isn't necessary to do what I need to do, but I like to leave a little note. The first thing that we're going to be doing with our attribute selectors is we're going to go ahead and we're going to target the links that are within my unordered lists down here. And let me just put a little bit of white space here to separate this out. So here's my unordered list that we're going to be targeting. And you can see, as I explained before, that each of the links is linking to a separate file type, whether it be a GIF, a PDF, a doc, an MP4, or whatnot. So what we're going to be doing is I have a bunch of little icons that I've created, and on the web page we're going to display icons in front of each of these links as a visual indication of what type of file the person will be viewing when they click these types of links. So we'll start off by affecting the background image on the A tag. Now, if I go ahead and just make a rule for the background image, so if I use a tag, for instance, and I go ahead and set the background image to something, and we'll just go ahead and we'll target the icon called icon_photo, and that's a ping file, so I'll put that extension in there. And if I save this right now and we go and refresh in the browser, you're going to see that I do get background images, but they obviously are going to obscure all of the links that I have on my page. This is not what I want. I want this background image to appear prior to the link text right here. So I'm going to have to make a rule that is going to allow me to be able to apply these images, because ultimately we're going to be applying different images to the different links that we have. So I'm going to want to make a blanket rule that is going to control the formatting. So before I go into my attribute selectors, I'm going to make a more specific selector here for links that are part of my unordered list. And what I'm going to do for these unordered list items is I'm going to tell these to display as inline block. We're going to go ahead and we're going to use a CSS selector of minimum height of 20 pixels. This is just going to allow my links to appear horizontally stacked and to have a minimum height of 20 pixels. If they needed to have more height, so let's say one of the lines would wrap onto multiple lines, it would expand as needed, but minimum height will be 20 pixels. I'm also going to add padding on the left of 20 pixels, and that's because I need to make a little bit of space for my graphical element. And then I'm going to use the background repeat CSS property and just tell it to have no repeat. This will prevent the images from repeating like they just were when I showed you in the browser. And for the background position, I'm going to set a horizontal offset of 0 and a vertical offset of 3 pixels. I know from testing this that I need to push my graphic down a little bit. If I set both of these values to 0, this is what it's going to look like in the browser. And you can see that now my graphic appears, but I feel like the graphic is slightly high. So I'm just going to go ahead and push that down a couple pixels. We can try 2 or 3 pixels, and you can see when I refresh in the browser that this graphic just gets slightly pushed down. That looks a little bit better to me. So that's going to be the general rule that I'm going to make that's going to apply to any of my links that are part of the unordered list. Now we're going to get a little bit more specific with our attribute selectors. So instead of all of these links getting the exact same graphic, I only want the links that are linking to some sort of image-based element, like these first two are going to GIF files. I only want those to show the photo icon. So we're going to change the selector to be more specific. When you use attribute selectors, what you need to do is you will pass on the attribute that you're trying to target inside of square brackets. So I'm going to go ahead and create square bracket here, and I'm going to be targeting, in this example, the HerF attribute. So I'm just going to go ahead and pass on the HerF attribute. And if we put HerF attribute here, and if I just put the HerF attribute equals, and then if I passed on some sort of value inside of my quotes, so if we come down here and let's just say that I'll copy this value right here, images pi.gif, let's say, and I'll close my quotes and I'll close the square bracket, and then I'm going to open the curly brace and pass on the CSS rule that I want to target. Well, if I save this and if we refresh now in the browser, you can see that only this first element is getting this particular icon, and that's because in this particular instance, only one of my links is meeting the criteria. If I came down here and I changed this particular HerF value to also be pi.gif so that these two are exactly the same, and if we saved our HTML and we went and refreshed in the browser, now both of the first two links are going to show this graphic because that criteria is currently being met by both of these. I'm just going to undo that. I could use any attribute that I wanted. Notice that all of these are linking to a target of blank, which would force these images or files or whatever they are to open in a separate browser window. Instead of passing on the HerF value, if I passed on the target of underscore blank and saved, now when I go back into the browser and I refresh, you can see that all of these that are using the attribute of target underscore blank now get the little image graphic. So you don't have to use the HerF attribute. You can use any attribute that you want. For our purposes in this example, though, we are going to use HerF, and instead of targeting an exact value like what I just demonstrated, I want this to be a little bit more generalized. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use attribute selectors that are going to allow me to target each of the file types based on their extension. So for instance, if the extension is a .gif, the last part of my HerF value, I want it to display the little photo image. If it's a .pdf, I want it to display my PDF image. If it's a doc extension, I want it to display my little Word doc icon or whatever it is. So that's what we're going to program in here. So I'm going to change this value so that the HerF value, and instead of being equal to, for instance, if I just put right here .gif, none of the criteria is simply linking to a .gif. If I save this now and we look inside of the browser, you can see that now none of these are going to get the little icon. What I actually want to say here is I want to target something that ends in .gif. So with attribute selectors, we can do that as well, and we do that by using the $sign after the attribute. So what this is saying is if the attribute ends with a certain value, in this case .gif, then we want it to display the photo icon. So if I save now and we go look inside of the browser and I refresh, any of my links that end with a .gif extension are going to now show the little photo icon. So let's go ahead and let's make some more specific rules for the rest of these here. And don't worry about these down here. We'll fix these in a couple minutes. So I'm just going to actually copy this rule. And actually, before I go on, let's change this rule slightly and let's add a group selector. So in case it links out to a different image file type, it'll still work. So mine are linking to .gifs, but what if this was a JPEG or something like that? If I save my page now and we refresh, you can see that only the first link is going to get the little icon for photo. Even though this is linking out to an image, we don't see that, and that's because our selector is targeting only GIF files. So I can easily change this by using a group selector. We talked about that in the last movie, so I'll separate this by using a comma, and then I'm going to add the extension of JPEG, and I might as well just make one more group selector and add the extension of PNG as well. And so now if I save this and we go look in the browser window and we refresh, any of the links, whether they're linking out to GIFs or JPEGs or PNG files, are going to show this little icon. So this is a very powerful feature because all of a sudden I could have tons of stuff that was linking out to these various image-based files, and it's always going to show that little image icon. Let's make some more for the PDF and the Word docs and the videos and whatnot. I'm going to copy this selector, and I'll just copy one of the values because the rest won't use group selectors. I'll paste this in, and again we're going to say the HerF value, but this time we want to target DOCs. If the HerF value ends with .doc, then I want to display my icon _doc. So I have a little graphic for that as well. And let's do that for PDF files too. And if we look down here, I also have some links to an MP4. So let's make one for a video file as well. So if the link ends in MP4, I'm going to show my film icon. If I save my page and we look at it in the browser, you can see that my different link types are now getting different little icons right here. So this is really powerful because once I make these rules, I could just go through and change my links however I need to, and the appropriate icon is going to appear based on how that file extension ends. So that is a great way to be able to select certain things. Now, if we look at the other links that we have within our list right here, you can see that the next set of links is linking out to a web page, which actually ends in a .asp. This one right here is passing on some JavaScript. So the extension, even though these are both linking out to web pages, the extension is not the same. And then this one is linking out to just .com. So obviously if we're linking out to a web page, the extension might be very different depending on the page that we're trying to target. So what we can do here, instead of linking out to what the attribute ends in, we can make a link based on what the attribute begins in. So all of these begin with http://. You can see that they all begin with that value. So let's make our next rule here use that formatting. When we create our selector, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my A tag, I'll open up the square brackets just as we did before, and pass on the attribute that I'm interested in targeting, which in this case is going to be HerF. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the little caret symbol, which you can create by holding down your Shift key and clicking the number 6 on your keypad. That will create this little caret symbol. And what this is saying is that if the attribute begins with a certain value, so we'll use our equal sign, and then in quotes we're going to put http://. I need to put my closing quotes and then close my square brackets. And I probably am going to also want to make sure that I target HTTPS, because my page might go out to an HTTPS, so I'm going to add that in just in case one of my links has that. And then we'll just go ahead and we'll set the background image to go to the particular image type that we are interested in displaying. So in this case, I'm going to display an image called www. And now when I save, if we go look in the browser, the rest of my links right here are going to pick up the icon that I have that indicates that these are web-based links. So you can see that this feedback is just giving my user a little bit more of a visual clue as to what type of file that they're going to see when they click these links. So that can be very helpful to our user. I'm going to show you one other selector right here. We're going to use a wildcard selector, which is our asterisk, and this will allow us to select something that contains a certain value. So for this last one, this one is actually linking out to something called podcast.com, which I just pretty much made up, but if our link contains the word podcast, we're going to display a different icon. So I'll copy this selector that I have right here. I forgot the AA tag, so let's put that in there because technically we need that. I'm not using an HTTPS, so that didn't really affect the results, but normally I would need that there since that is part of my selector. And I'm going to use the HerF value, but instead of the little caret, I'm going to use an asterisk, and then I'm just going to type in the word that I want to include. So here I'll just write podcast, and if it finds podcast, I have an icon here called podcast. And if I save now and we refresh in the browser, any of these links that contain the word podcast within them are going to show my little podcast link. So even though the first criteria was met, it still started with HTTPS. Now I have another rule that follows it, and since it now meets this criteria, it's going to overwrite that other one. Here the order would be important, so if I flip-flopped the order of these two rules and saved my page and we looked at it in the browser, you can see that the podcast icon no longer shows up. So in this case, I would want to make sure that these followed this specific order, because even though it's a little bit more specific, whichever one comes last, it's going to trump the other one. So I'm thinking that this one's more general, HTTP, and then this one is saying, okay, if it contains podcasts like this. You could also pass on multiple selectors and have multiple criteria met if that's something that you are interested in placing. To make this a little bit more clear to our user, after the text that shows up, I'm going to actually have the web page display some text that's going to appear so that the user knows that, oh, they're going to see a graphic when they click this link, or they're going to see a PDF file. We have the icons here, but we want to make it really clear because sometimes people don't always understand what we're trying to tell them. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to pass on some more information here just so we can practice using our selectors. So this is going to allow us to add some file extensions. Our selector that we're going to create here is going to be slightly different, and I'll just make a little CSS comment that just notes that we're going to add file extension text. And the first selector that I'm going to use here is I'm going to use I'll use the square brackets and we're going to say HerF. I'm going to use the $, so I'm going to say if the particular link ends in, and I'll make that equal to, and then inside of quotes I'm going to put .gif, and then I'm going to close my quotes. I'll close the square brace and I'm going to use colon after, which is a pseudo selector which will allow me to actually generate content after this particular selector. So after this selector is found, whatever's on the page, the content that I'm going to generate is going to be created after. After is used often with content. So I'm going to type content and I'll go ahead and make the content equal to a value of space, and then in parentheses we'll put PDF in caps like that. I'm going to close my quotations and I'm going to sorry, this one's actually the graphic. Let's write graphic here. I'm going to close my quotations and then I'm going to add my semicolon. If I save now, if the file extension ends in GIF, it's going to display the word graphic. So let's go ahead and preview this in the browser. When I refresh on my screen, you can see that the word graphic has now been added on, and it actually added on to these as well. I think I'll use a little bit more of a specific selector here so this no longer cascades down. Let's go in and let's change these to be ULAs to prevent those other links from taking on this type of formatting. There we go. We still want the word graphic to appear if these links are linking out to a graphic, so I'll leave that as a more general formatting, but you can see when I got more specific with my rule for the files that ended in GIF or JPEG or PNG, then it went ahead and eliminated the background images from these links down here. So that's all I really need to do to fix that. Now this file right here, we changed it so it's linking to a JPEG, so I want to add some other selectors here just like we did up above. So here I'm just going to copy this. We'll add a comma and we're going to say if this is a JPEG, and we better add a ping here as well just to cover all of our bases. Now if I save and we go look in the browser, you can see that the word graphic is now added onto this as well. So we'll do this for the rest of these. And this is going to just follow the same sort of formatting. So open the square brace, pass on the attribute that I want to select. We're going to say if it ends in a particular series of characters, so we'll use the $, I'll use equals, then I'm going to use inside of quotes what I want it to end in, and here we'll do a .pdf. I'll close my quotes, I'll close the square brace, and then I'm going to use the colon to indicate that after this selector is found, I want to do something, and we're going to go ahead and pass on that we want the content that is displayed on the page to be PDF. And I'm going to copy this, we're going to paste this in, I'll change this to DOC, and we're going to change the text to say Word doc. Make one for our MP4 file, and we'll have the text display that this is going to be a video. So if we save this now and we refresh in the browser, all of these links should now say PDF. Now you can see that the text got slammed together on these, and that's because I didn't include an extra space. So inside of my quotes, I'm going to want to make sure that I have an extra space right here, because it's literally creating whatever text is inside the quotes, including empty spaces. So I'm going to want to include those spaces. If I refresh now, you're going to see that I'll have an extra space that's going to appear. So that looks much better when it adds that extra space. That's what I wanted. So now we have to address these web-based links. Our selector here is going to be slightly different. The attribute that we're going to use is going to be HerF, but I want to get what it starts with. So I'm going to use that little caret just like we did before. We'll put the equals, and then in quotes I'm going to do the HTTP : / and then we'll use the after. Okay, if I save that and we go refresh in the browser, you can now see that we get the web link text that's added on to these. Alright, let's do some more selecting down here with these links that we have at the bottom of the page. Remember that these exist inside of a paragraph that has a class of sample graphs. That's just because I used a class selector here so I could be more specific. And what I'm going to do to create a little bit of indentation and room for my icons that I'm going to include is I'm going to go back up to the rule that I created at the beginning, this ULA, and we'll just use a group selector here, and we're going to put dot sample graphs space A, and that's just going to indent these and create some space so that the icons will have room to display on the page. Now that we have that there, we're going to use a couple of different methods of selecting. So I'm going to use dot sample graphs A, and we're going to pass on the HerF attribute, and here we're going to use the asterisk. Remember, the asterisk just means that you have to have whatever the value is somewhere in the HerF attribute. So I'm going to start off by using the value of, and if we go down here and look at the selectors, these are linking to bar underscore graph, line underscore graph, area underscore graph, and then this one has a rel of graph. So that's a different attribute. These are HerF attributes. This is the rel attribute. But underscore graph is the predominant value that I'm selecting. So I'm going to make a selector that says if it contains underscore graph, then make the background image link to this pie icon that I have, which indicates that this is a pie chart. So this page is about graphs or whatever different types of graphs. So you can see that now all of these are going to take on my pie chart graphic. Now it looks like I'm going to have to adjust the vertical spacing because this seems a little too high on these graphics. So just because of how these graphics were saved or the size of them or whatever, they need to be pushed down slightly. So I'm going to just go back into my editor, and before I put this in, we'll just do a sample graphs A, and up here we are using a background position of 0 and 2 pixels. It looks like that's going to need to be a little bit higher. So down for sample graph. So I'm just going to overwrite that, and we'll just try pushing it down. Let's try 6. Oh, that looks much better. Okay, so I'll just leave that as 6. These guys worked fine with that value set as 2, but obviously these links down here, they need to have a little bit more spacing. Because these are all linking to different types of graphs, I don't want the pie graph to show for all of them. So I'm going to have to change my selection a little bit. This one, I actually want it to include the word pie, and then we'll use bar and line and area. So let's change this. Instead of using underscore graph, let's just change this to say pie. Now when I save and we look in the browser, you can see that only the link that's going to something that contains the word pie in it is going to display this particular icon. So we're being a little bit more specific with what it is that it contains. I'm just going to use that same logic multiple times, and we'll change it to show a bar image for something that contains the word bar. This would be linking to a bar graph. Actually, the name of my image here is chart. And then the next one that we're going to encounter is going to be a line graph. And I have one that is an area graph. So I'll save that and we'll check it out in the browser. You can see that now each of these links is displaying this specific type of icon based on the type of link that it's going to. Alright, the last type of attribute selector I'm going to share with you is our last link here is linking out to a null link. And I have a rel of XY graph. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the rel attribute for this last one rather than HerF. And remember, you can use any attributes that you want. So we'll type sample graphs just like we did before, and then we're going to say A, and inside of my square brackets I'm going to say rel, so I'm targeting a different type of attribute. And now I'm going to use the tilde symbol, so that little curly symbol. This is created by using the Shift key, and if you click on the key that creates the tilde, which if you have a full-size keyboard, it's right to the left of the number 1. And I'm just going to say if it equals, and then inside of quotes I'll put XY, close the square brace, and then I'll pass on the actual rule, and we're just going to have it display a background image that is going to show our xy.ping file. When we use the tilde, let me just show you this real quickly first. So now you can see it's showing my little graph for the XY icon that I've created. We could actually achieve the same thing here instead of using the tilde by using the asterisk. So if I use the asterisk, remember the asterisk just means that if that certain value is contained somewhere inside of the rule. So if I refresh my page, it's going to look exactly the same. The difference between the asterisk and the tilde is the tilde is looking for an attribute that is within a space separated list. In this case, our rel value has a space separated list. It doesn't just contain XY, but it's actually a space separated list. Sometimes you'll find that that type of selection might be more advantageous for you, and so if that's the case, you can go ahead and use that little tilde. So this example hopefully gave you some idea of how you can use the attribute selectors. They're very, very powerful. Something like this where you have a bunch of links and you just wanted to display different icons or have different text appear after the links, this could be really useful because now I don't have to worry about assigning a particular class or anything like that. All I have to do is just write the text, and if the extension ends in PDF or JPEG or GIF or whatever, the appropriate icon and the appropriate text is going to display. Attribute selectors are often commonly used on input fields too. So in HTML, when you create an input field, there are text, button, checkbox, file, hidden, image, password, radio, reset, submit. All those are attributes that you can pass on via the type attribute to an input field, and sometimes you want your input fields to be styled differently. So as opposed to adding a bunch of classes to your input fields so you can style them, you can use these attribute selectors and use the type attribute to select the appropriate input field and style it in a particular way. It's a great way to work with forms, so that might be a way that you might want to incorporate these attribute selectors. But hopefully this gave you an idea of some fun things that you can do with attribute selectors.